This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cosmographia episode
10.
We are the shiny people. And we are here with Brad.
Looking good. Number 10.
The Shiny Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.
We are here with the quiet guy and Randall.
The Brothers of the Shine.
Freshly polished.
That's right.
For the listeners, you probably need to explain that.
So we've had a couple of YouTube comments that are like, who are those shiny guys? Like, who are the shiny people? And why do they keep telling Randall that the podcast is over? That was like,
Yeah, let the guy talk, damn it.
yeah, let him keep going. And we're like, sorry, Randall told shiny people to tell him when it's been an hour.
Well, we need to remind him. Randall said, let's try to keep it to an hour, so we'll tell him, but he may go for 2 hours, but at least we're going to bring it up.
That's right. So.
Yeah, I mean, because we are not locked into some set time frame every week. We can,
right.
And if we go anything really, we go beyond an hour, that should be considered a bonus.
Frickin'
right.
bonus. That's right.
That's right. Bonus.
Love it, people. Come on.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Cosmographia episode 9.
10?
We
10.
thought we were wrapping up with Atlantis on number 9, but I think we got a little more. What can we add in about that city plan, Randall?
Well, are you sure you're ready for this?
I don't know. You got something else?
Well, I got another couple of little tidbits before we move on, although always this will be in the background because we're basically laying out a body of evidence from episode to episode, and it's all interlinked. Obviously, we can't talk about Atlantis without the chronostratigraphic context, which is essentially the Younger Dryas. So I thought that it would be insightful and helpful to probe into the details about the Younger Dryas a little bit further, because we are looking at sort of the dividing line, the great dividing line in the history of humans on planet Earth. The 200,000 year plus history of modern humans on Earth has this big dividing line, this big abyss between modern history and prehistory. If we assume, if we're allowed to push modern history back to 8, 9, perhaps 10,000 years, which is becoming more and more feasible, and as long as we don't necessarily restrict the definition of civilization as being the appearance of writing, because that right now tends to be the criteria by which we determine, were these people civilized? Well, they wrote things down, right? That's been more or less the criteria. And at what point do we see people writing things down? Well, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, generally in that range, give or take. But when do we see people establishing agriculture? When do we see people domesticating animals? When do we see the dispersion of languages? We can take all of that back to the very early Holocene, the first cities that would be part of the historical record, right? We go back to the early Holocene for that, 8,000, 9,000, maybe 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, Jericho.
Now, yeah, then we go just another millennium or two beyond that, and now we're into the big period of flux, the transition zone between literally 2 world ages. Because if we defined the previous world, it was a very, very different world than the world we inherited in the Holocene. And so I think one of the objectives of these discussions that we're doing here would be to help shed light and elaborate specifically how different our planet is now from what it was 15 or 20,000 years ago, while modern humans were living on the planet. And you see, we can't really, I mean, we can pick up the artifacts, certainly we can pick up the tools and the debitage and the debris left over from the activities of early prehistoric humans. But I think that's only telling us part of the story, a small part of the story. And in order, I think, to get at the bigger picture, we have to set a context. We have to understand the environment in which the human story is playing out. So to that end, we will spend time going into the details of the late Pleistocene and the transition between the Pleistocene and the Holocene, which was marked by this rapid disappearance of the great ice sheets and the rapid rising of sea level and the major shifting of ecosystems and biomes around the planet, the collapse of old ecosystems and the rise of new ecosystems. The transition is truly extraordinary. The disappearance of the great megafauna. So what I would like to do, and if this is of interest to the listeners, is go into that, get into the richness of the detail, looking at the animal life, looking at the nature of the global environment, and then being able to talk about what happened to cause these dramatic changes. What happened to this planet that caused it to shift, literally to shift gears so powerfully and dramatically. I mean, think about this, okay? If you took from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean today, and we went in there and we had this gigantic bulldozer, and we were to bulldoze the entire country of Canada from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and I mean every tree down, gone, right? All of the forests that are reaching from Hudson Bay out to the Western Cordillera and beyond to the Pacific Ocean. Boom, we took every tree out. We clear cut, right? That would be a pretty dramatic environmental change, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, that's exactly what happened, except now we also have to add a mile and a half of ice over that whole landmass, right? And what I'm trying to do is get people to ponder that and try to actually visualize what we're talking about and appreciate what that's implying. It's implying something that nobody's figured out yet, really. Nobody has the answer. That's the thing, and I want to repeat that. Nobody has figured it out. I think there's teams of scientists out there and individual scientists that are, at this point, converging on the answer, and I think that you know, the quest for an answer has been considerably accelerated now that we have expanded our thinking to embrace the cosmic domain. I think now we're going to be able to get somewhere with trying to understand the changes that have engulfed this planet repeatedly, and most especially and most recently 11 or 12,000, 13,000 years ago during this tremendous time of transition. But there's all these other little anomalies that the standard model of history cannot explain. And so one of those is germane to the subject that we've been talking about for the last 4 or 5 episodes. So I think that end, I will do a share screen, and we'll have a look here back at the city, the circular city complex that we left off with. And let's do our screen share. Here it is. I think you guys are going to like this.
Coming up. There it is.
Here it is. Yeah. So if you recall in the description, the Temple of Poseidon, was on this central island, and Plato carefully describes the diameters of these concentric rings that are composed alternatingly of land and sea. And the sea was brought in through this canal. The circular moats were cut, and all of this was to facilitate the passage of the ships, the triremes that are carrying trade, because he describes they've got a whole trade network set up. They've got colonies. We'll have to go back and revisit some of the narrative in the text to get that specifics. I don't think we read that specific part, but essentially that's what he's describing. And so this was the hub of this global trade network, or at least, shall we say, Atlantic trade network. We might be a
Quick a bit.
little bit more local, yeah. But let's not rule out. We don't want to limit our thinking.
Right.
Okay, so anyways, here we go. Here we've got the rings. And if you recall, the island was 5 stadia in diameter, right? And then we had concentric rings of 1, right? Let's see, we got it right here. Okay, so what I want to show you is that this Temple of Poseidon is 1 stadium in length and 1/2 stadium in width. So right there is our double square.
Yo, Mamel, man. How you doing, homie?
Geometricians and mathematicians.
Yo, thanks for tuning in, man.
2-to-1 rectangle.
It's good, man. How are you?
How you geometrically derive the golden
Mamel
section,
in the
the golden
house.
ratio, which we can talk about.
I'm,
at some point. But it's also found in a lot of architecture.
I'm watching stuff
single
about Atlantis,
architecture,
man.
Temple architecture. You know, this double square, this 2-to-1 rectangle.
What the fuck are you watching? Didn't understand.
Proportions
Atlantis, it's the...
Right.
It's
right,
the...
right. 2-to-1 rectangle. So Plato's describing the Temple of Poseidon.
So
as 2-to-1
Plato,
and it's 1
in
stadium in
Greece,
length and a 1/2
he
stadium in width.
pretty
Now,
much
you remember
wrote
we were
about
talking
Atlantis.
about the stadium.
And I
Well,
said Google Maps
stadium
open.
is where we get our word.
Let me show you.
Our word stadium comes from the.
I had Google Maps open.
Greek
So what happened was
stade, which was
there were
actually
glaciers that
the
melted
facility, the
huge amounts of
stadium that
water
they used to have races. and
11,000 years
stuff,
ago.
see. And it was generally
And
one track around was 608 feet, or generally rounded
these
off
people are
600
arguing
feet.
that it was caused by a
But if you
comet
actually get
strike
into the meteorological
or
origins
several
of it,
comet
the
strikes
most
during the torrid
common
meteor stream.
length. In fact, if I
I'm just cleaning out my
if you
computer
pulled
1
up,
second.
oh,
I'm gonna
just
pull
like
up
the
a map. Let
Encyclopedia
me show you,
Britannica
dude.
or even the dictionary,
I'll show
I
you
think
the
you'll
land
find,
mass that was completely submerged by
that a
water
state is usually
because there was a
defined
lot
as
more
608
land
feet.
11,000 years
Which
ago than there was
contrasts somewhat
today
with
because
the
it was all
furlong,
frozen
which is-
over ice
which
over
we know
Canada and stuff.
specifically has a very precise number,
And Plato
which is
wrote about it as past
660
like the Strait of Gibraltar to the west.
But
Let me show you, man.
You were looking that up for us last week, Kyle, weren't you? The stade.
How you doing, Mamel?
Yeah, I looked up the unit, the stadion.
Yo, thanks for
Uh-huh.
freaking saying
I was
hey.
just reading from Wikipedia.
What's up, man? Let me show you. I'm a big Plato fan. I think Plato is
Looking at the definition now, and I don't
pretty accurate.
see. Okay, here's
not accurate,
Webster.
but like
Yeah, it gave us a range between
Say he wrote everything?
610 and
Yeah.
like 600 feet or something like that.
We're curious also that's the ice ages, and then the in between are stades and interstades.
Interstadial, yeah, that's right.
Stades and interstades. So
yo, what is up,
we got a link
Mamel?
there already.
Huh. Good point, Bradley.
I want to show you the satellite, not just the map. Let
I
me
am
show
paying
you.
attention.
Yeah, I think you are.
I'm not just shiny.
Okay, here we go. Yeah. So
Okay, what?
This is at
Okay.
dictionary.com.
Okay.
Ancient Greek and Roman
I'm
unit
good, buddy.
length,
What the fuck is
the
that?
Athenian
Yo, let me
unit
show you.
being equal to about 607 feet.
Okay, they're giving 607.
So they're talking about a
right,
specific
okay. Yeah,
temple
you'll get
and a specific
variations
design.
Now, to the more in-depth
On an island,
academic
probably. Let me
studies,
show you. Let me
will
show you all
get,
these islands.
something more precise. But actually, the fact that there could be variability built into the stade may be relevant because the length of the stade
Check
may have
this
been
out.
adjusted according to local geography.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Yeah.
Yes, and so we
Like
could go.
where you were in terms of latitude, maybe it would adjust.
Yes. Yes. As you
Check
go,
this out. You see that?
Here's the thing: if you have a minute of arc, a degree of arc, a
See
second
that
of
right
arc
on the fault line?
around
That's where people think
around the
Atlantis is,
parallels,
dude.
the
Right
great
here.
circular
You see that?
parallels around
Right
the
here.
planet.
They used to think that
Obviously,
this
as
was
you're
like
going away from the equator,
a place.
those
Like,
circles
or it could have been
are
here.
shrinking, right?
These
Yes.
are the
The
Azores,
radius
right?
of those circles is shrinking, and so therefore, any increment of the
You're closer to there, my
circumference is going
man.
to be shrinking with it.
I wonder if you know anything about it,
So
you know?
if you start out a degree, you can do this.
So they think that
um,
this may have been above land
figure
and this may have been
very-
above land,
the,
you know?
the polar radius of the Earth is very close to 7,900 miles, and the
Check this out.
equatorial.
These Azores are like
uh,
So you
the
can imagine
polar
quite a bit of this
diameter,
may have been above
700 and
the water, you know what I
7,900
mean?
miles. Equatorial diameter 7,926 miles. So you got a 26-mile difference there.
So he's talking about
Now,
evidence for
there's
it? I don't know.
another
I
way
haven't seen
that
this one
you
yet.
could possibly adjust the length of a unit of measurement based upon a changing size of the Earth is because not only is an arc of the parallel changing, but so is the length of the radius as you go from equator to pole. And in fact, as you go from equator to pole, the length of the radius, the
Check
Earth's
this out.
radius is going to shrink by 13 miles.
The torrid meteor
And
stream
that
is
kind of
a
came up
is a
earlier in
meteor
one of our discussions talking about
tail
plate
of
movements
a
and so
comet
forth,
that
because
left all these meteors in our
we've been
solar
talking about
system that
the idea
we go
that
through that stream
we
every
have to be looking
every
at
twice
more
every
dynamic
year.
model.
You
in
see that?
Not only do we
See
have
this?
the
So that's
continental
the
drift
sun.
movement, the lateral movement of plates,
That's
but
the
we've also
Earth's
got the
rotation around the
vertical
sun every
movements
year,
of the
right?
plates. And
Dude,
that
this
movement
is the meteor
those two
shower
movements are likely integrated.
that we
In other
cross
words,
through.
as
We
you
cross
do
here in
this,
July,
it
we
probably
cross here in November.
accelerates this. That would
October,
only be
November.
natural, see. So
October
anyway,
torrids and November
the size
torrids.
and shape of the Earth does play into a number
So they're
of
arguing
important
that
things
11,000
has to
years
be
ago,
considered
Earth
when
got
we're
like
thinking in
bombarded by
terms
several
of
events
the changing planet.
that led to mass
because
extinctions and
you
stuff.
see, the
You know,
idea that the Arctic Circle
crazy stuff, man.
is where it is, and it has and compared to the center of mass of the Great Laurentide ice sheet, which was centered over Hudson Bay, and a lot of the Arctic Ocean was actually clear during the late glacial maximum, which is pretty bizarre when you think about it. And western Alaska was, for the most part, not glaciated. Large parts of Siberia were not glaciated. The entire glacier mass would have been shifted off of the North Pole in this bizarre way. Also interesting, if you take the Arctic Circle and the size of the Arctic Circle, and it were you to move the combined
Plato,
Laurentide
like
and
Plato, he's
Cordilleran ice
possibly
sheets
one of the
up
best
into the Arctic
authors
Circle,
ever,
pretty much fill the
philosophers
Arctic
ever,
Circle
you know?
very nicely, see. So this has led people like Charles Hapgood to speculate, and others to speculate.
Yo, my man, I got
there
50
was some kind of
followers,
a pole
dude.
shift.
Hell yeah,
Now,
man. Hopefully we
earlier,
can
Emmanuel
get affiliate soon, you know?
Theorized
Fuck
the
yeah.
pole shift, but he was looking
Thanks
at
for following,
the whole
homie, a while
axis of
ago.
the Earth
Appreciate that big
shifting,
time.
which could only happen under the most extreme and extraordinary circumstances. And I don't really believe.
I don't have
this
high
model.
viewership,
I
though.
don't believe this model.
I got the homies, I got the
Charles
realists
Hapgood's
in the
model is
chats,
more-
like
a little more
you,
sophisticated
but I don't
than
have like
we saw
I think I
certain
need like
episodes
3
of
viewers at a time,
Accelerated
average or something. I don't know if I can,
Tectonics,
if I have that,
this
if I will have that for a
could
while,
get
you know. Like,
And if that
how you doing, buddy?
movement is
Playing
accelerated,
AG lately?
it could lead us to conjecture how much of that movement
I've had a busy week. I'm probably gonna play again
what
this
would be
upcoming
driving
week.
it, see?
Gotta get Silo. I want to get Silo
And I
like.
think that again we have to look at
What
this,
gave Silo 110?
this
That'd be amazing.
isostatic adjustment that's going on.
Agent.
Because if you have a major deglaciation and you have some sections of the Earth rising by 2,000 or 3,000 feet, other sections of the Earth depressing by 2,000 or 3,000 feet, now what's happening is because as the planet is spinning, it's essentially a plastic mass. So its mass is going to be trying to distribute itself according to the sum total of these centrifugal and gravitational forces working on it as it's rotating. It never gets there, never gets to equilibrium, but that's what it's trying to do, see? So now you have this major glaciation and deglaciation episode. So now
Right?
you've got
Look at this.
enormous mass
Why couldn't this
transfer
have
over the
been above
surface of
sea
the
level?
Earth.
You know what I mean?
What
Look at
does
this.
this do? Not only
Why?
to the stability of the Earth's
You know what I mean?
orbit, or rather rotation, not its orbit, its rotation, or the
Sorry, but
the
too hard to
process
understand with
of
English words
tectonics.
for me.
So if you have a deglaciation and part of the continent rises, what is happening? See, it's like you have to think of this.
D'accord, mon ami, je peux vous aider un peu. J'espère que vous me comprendrez.
If you're going from the
Comprendras.
towards the equator, you're going up here. You're going to
Tu me comprendras.
get there. See, so now
Um,
move one of the plates 2,000 or 3,000 feet.
il dit qu'il y avait des météores qui viennent extraterrestres
That setup
qui ont battu la Terre.
caused that plate to want to move, to migrate
I understand you do, but other guys who speak. Oh, I hear you. Yeah, exactly. This is not really the best first one, you know what I mean? Enfin. Ce que je dis est que j'ai besoin d'ouvrir Google Terre, Google Earth, mais mon ordinateur n'est pas très puissant. Il va être très lentement. Et si Play-Doh a dit qu'il y avait c'était un endroit vrai qui a existé, pourquoi pas? J'imagine qu'il était très avec beaucoup de vie, de tropical. Look at that. How, look at that. It's right here. That's friggin' like you can see it.
Initial isostasy is going to be drastic. Right? It's going to move quickly, and then eventually slows down. Right?
Yeah.
That quick isostasy up and down.
Just one question. Is that some theory? Yeah, no, well, yeah, it is. 100%, but the last podcast, okay, let me pause this guy for a sec. This is, I don't know what he's talking about with this temple. I'm gonna fast forward past this temple. This is such an example, but he showed nano diamond. Okay, since you asked, I'll pull that one up. He showed nano diamond, which is formed mainly by like asteroids being formed. I'm not in that mood. Sorry, dude. Oh, for sure. No, for sure, man. No, I totally know what you mean. You want to see hard evidence. I hear you. I totally understand. Carlson. So there was a new crater discovered by NASA scientists in Greenland. I can hear you. Explain me? Yeah, for sure. There was a massive meteor crater found in Greenland. Nano diamond layer found on the Greenland ice. This has to be it. So there's these nano diamonds apparently that are formed at like about 11,000 years ago.
And in this video, I'm going to continue my review of the Younger Dryas impact date research. Now, the last time
No, this isn't the video. Was this the one? I don't think this was the one. Yeah, man. So, and that's, well, that's their argument. That's why they say, yeah. Okay, let's first focus this one with the nano diamonds. So there was an impact crater, Lake Hiawatha, in what's it called? Greenland? And basically, they found it over many different areas, over a wide area, a wide geographic area. And they argue that it led to the draining of... I don't think this is the one, though. Talk a bit about it here. They don't talk about the nanodiamonds here, but they talk about the it was another one.
George, when were you guys up there? When was that?
2010.
Okay.
So this is the meteor stream that he was talking about. You know what I mean? That I was talking about it before earlier.
I drove up from Denver with Malcolm LeCompte,
Nice.
and me and Dr. LeCompte.
This
had
isn't
a-
the
had a
one, though.
Great drive up the Front Range and drove in.
I think it was this one. How you doing, Mamel? Well, okay, the argument of the nanodiamonds is that... What are they arguing? That a volcano formed these nanodiamonds and dispersed them? Where would it occur? Pretty much, there's this like stone that was only formed from outer space. It's like this formation. I think it's the impact formation. It's not really extraterrestrial, but it has extraterrestrial origins, right? Because
This
when it hits
is
the Earth, it
Cosmographia,
fuses,
the Randall Carlson
creates this
podcast.
like specific shaped diamond. Yeah, seems too weird for me. I'm sorry, dude. Not against you, but it's not my kind of stuff. I don't want to make a drama, but no worry. Not my stuff, sorry. It seems interesting, so no worries, man. Here, yo. This guy, he talks about... Here we go. And microspherules. So he talks about the science of when...
The Hearth site is a short-term camp dated to
When these microspherules were formed, you know what I
2540
mean?
plus or
No
minus
stress, homie.
40 radiocarbon years before present. I don't know what that would adjust to in samples ranging in age from the late glacial maximum,
Seems
so
interesting.
dating back to about 20,000 years ago, all the way up to modern times. Also included samples representing younger Dryas-like environmental perturbations, sediments of alluvial and Aeolian process, in other words, sediments that were deposited by water and by wind. Alluvial meaning water, flowing water, and Aeolian
Here we
meaning
go.
by wind.
Here,
Would
here.
make sense. If you think about it, going back to,
Nanodiamond
the
rich
wasteland
layer in the
concept,
Greenland ice sheet.
this idea that for 1,300 years there was this decline in temperature
Over in
where
like
you had
13,000 years
3,000
ago. It's
years
like
of this
evidence that
gradual
there was
warming,
comets that...
bringing,
There's probably
causing
several
the ice sheet to
comets that
shrink back.
melted
Now you had this
and destroyed
catastrophic
civilizations,
event
you
at
know.
12,008, 12,900
Doesn't rule it
years
out.
ago. And then
It's a very
just as we
valid
found
hypothesis.
in
These
the
nanodiamonds
Bull
are very
Creek
strong
layer,
evidence, you know.
which
And they use carbon dating. They use carbon-14 dating,
zone of
which is very accurate.
sterility,
Let me show you some
where
of the
it was
graphs,
sterile,
buddy.
was much more widespread. In fact, it was continental, is what it appears like.
Check this
Um,
out.
Back into cold.
Look at that.
So these two
So-
things correlate in time. How are they connected? That's the question. I don't see how the distribution of nanodiamonds itself is going to cause the cooling,
Nanodiamond, look at this.
or reverse of that, the
Look at that.
cooling is going to cause the deposition
What's the
of the
age here?
nanodiamonds. So it would seem to me logical that both
That's
the
crazy.
rapid cooling that you see here and the spike in nanodiamonds owe their origins to some third
Enjoy.
process.
Well, haven't you heard this?
Look at
the
this.
slang
Look at
term
that
for
spike
diamonds is
in
ice?
nanodiamonds.
It is,
caused-
isn't it?
Look at that.
caused the
Oh, can
cooling,
you see
man.
that? Sorry. Oh, I was blocking. Are you serious? I gotta go back. Sorry, man.
Interesting. How are they connected? That's the question.
right? See that
I don't see
11,000
how
years ago, the younger Dryas.
distribution of nanodiamonds itself
Look at that
is going
spike.
to
That's
cause the
insane.
cooling. Or
That's definitely an
reverse of
impact.
that the cooling is
100%.
going to cause
what I mean?
the deposition of the
I think my
nanodiamond.
own opinion interesting.
So it would seem to me logical
what? I
that
gotta
both
do
the
some
rapid
research about
cooling that you
noise,
see
man.
here and the spike in nanodiamonds owe their
Cool, man.
origins to some third
No worries, dude. You don't have to. You know, you don't have to choose the side.
Slang term for diamonds
I
is
have no
ice.
horse in this race.
It is,
could
isn't
cause-
it?
just-
It could cause
I'm
the
just
cooling,
objectively talking. You know,
Okay.
it's cool, buddy. How you doing, man? It's nice.
Interesting. Okay.
Really interesting.
So here's what they have to say about this. So this project was done in cooperation with PBS Nova Documentary Productions.
Yeah, so he's a geologist. The evidence that he's might
2008,
show is going to be very
during which
geological,
several
not
authors
anthropological.
sampled at a
You know what I mean?
margin site east of Kongerlussuaq.
That's the evidence he's going to have,
Kongerlu- I
but
have
that's
no
why,
idea.
like he's on about
Kongerlussuaq,
exactly.
West Greenland, approximately 1 kilometer
Yeah.
inland from the ice margin. Our goal was to collect continuous samples of ice extending from
Yeah,
the
he's a
last
geologist,
glacial
climatologist.
episode through the early Holocene, including the 1,300-year-long YD cooling episode. One of the authors has considerable experience sampling along the Greenland ice margin.
Okay, even if
and
you
he identified a candidate
deny
for the
everything else
younger
they say,
Dryas
how do you
age
explain these
section based
nanodiamond
on visual
formations?
inspection of dust
Right?
stratigraphy.
That's pretty spectacular.
Our
evidence.
sampling was guided by the presence of clear, dust-poor ice of assumed early Holocene age, stratigraphically higher than a sharp visual change into dusty ice of inferred younger Dryas age, beneath which was
I don't know,
another
man. You
sharp
sound like a
change
smart
into clear
dude.
ice of assumed Balling Alarod age. So that fits again with the idea of more airborne dust and contaminants in the air, which would then correlate with a decline in vegetation. So that's consistent with what we just learned about the Bull Creek episode. The final and preferred hypothesis is that the Greenland nanodiamond peak layer. Oh, and let me mention here the authors of this, Andre V.
I'm not a scientist.
Kurbata.
Time to eat.
It's
No worries, dude. Be right back later. Still stream.
K-U-R-B-A-T-O-D.
Have a good day, buddy.
He is with
No worries,
the,
dude. You too, man.
Climate Change Institute.
No way, man.
University of Maine.
Science, whatever. It's just all about studying,
and
you know,
Paul A.
just studying
Mayuski,
and
also
reading
with the
up.
same
And
institution. Now, Mayuski,
honestly,
I might
if someone
mention,
studies for 4 years on the internet,
did some
outside of
early
university,
studies
it's-
on the
you learn,
atmosphere.
you know more science than someone that
the,
you know,
the
hasn't
unique
studied science at all,
conditions of the
so.
atmosphere during the younger Dryas.
Mel,
We've
you're the
actually
man,
have
dude.
referred
Thanks for
to
saying, hey, man.
Mayuski
Thanks
early
for,
in
thanks
one
for
of the
questioning
earlier
my beliefs,
podcasts.
too. And
We should probably come back
before I
and
believe everything they say,
re-reference his
homie.
work. But he, I think as early
You're
as
the
the
man.
90s, early
That's the
90s, was
scientific way.
identifying that something very anomalous
question
was
everything.
happening to the global
Thanks, man.
atmosphere
You too,
during
dude.
the
Thanks
younger
for saying hey.
Dryas. So this was pre-2007.
I might go back to
so
the Atlantis
pre
video. I'm not
the introduction
I'm
of
not
the
lying.
impact hypothesis. So he's with the, and then we have Ted Bunch in there, and we have James Kennett, and it's quite a long,
Yo, heart, buddy. Heart to
a
you.
long list,
Cheers.
including Kinsey. Remember Kinsey? We talked about him a few
Oh,
weeks ago.
yeah.
He says, we report the discovery in Greenland ice sheet of a discrete layer of free nanodiamonds in very high abundances, implying most likely either an unprecedented influx of
Heart,
extraterrestrial
Mamel, heart,
material
buddy.
or a cosmic event that occurred after the last glacial episode. From that layer, we extracted nanodiamonds
Same mood, dude.
and hexagonal
Have fun.
diamonds,
Woo,
or
yeah.
Lonsdaleite, an accepted ET impact indicator at abundances of up to about 5 times 10 to the 6th times the background levels in adjacent younger and older ice. I think we read that last week, so I'm not going to get into that. But recently, scientists reported an abundance peak in nanodiamonds at multiple locations across North America that is restricted to a thin sediment layer.
Add me on Discord if you have it. We can talk. Oh, sick, man. I don't have Discord,
of approximately
but I have to get it.
1,000 years ago.
I have to get
A
it.
peak in hexagonal
will-
diamonds
what happened
was
is
also reported in the younger Dryas.
My
at
email I
Arlington
signed up for
Canyon,
Discord with, it's
California, which we
I don't have access
spent,
to
I
it
think,
anymore.
most of a of a podcast talking about Arlington.
And I tried to
Canyon.
reset it, but
The
it
only known
wouldn't
explanation
reset.
for
I don't
terrestrial
know. I gotta email
delight
them,
is by arrival
or I gotta
inside
make a whole new other email address.
extraterrestrial
I
objects
can't. I don't know what
and
what
or by
happened, but I
impact
can't
of
access
such
my
objects
Hotmail
with
email.
the Earth's surface. This discovery begged a prediction that a coeval
Number
layer with
6969?
high nanodiamond concentrations
Nice.
should be
That's
preserved
jokes.
in the Greenland ice sheet.
Sick, man. Okay, I
No
have this
layers
info.
of
I have this info.
nanodiamonds have previously been reported
I'll
from the Greenland
I'll
ice
add you
sheet
when
or
I
any
when I
other
figured
form of
that stuff out,
glacial
man.
ice.
For sure, dude.
Consequently,
Thanks,
we
man. Appreciate it, man.
on a section of the Greenland ice sheet that potentially
Not a
spans
joke.
the last deglacial. in
Yeah,
search
really.
Of a layer containing an abundance of free nanodiamonds.
No, for sure, dude. No stress.
That might be coeval layer.
Found in Hall's Cave, which is weird because.
And then
Okay.
also it says, yeah, magnetic spherules and also carbon spherules.
The uplifting may sometimes occur much faster because the rates of weathering are actually, and see, that's it. When you go and you look at, you study you look at the studies on weathering rates and how quickly mountain ranges are wore down. Basically, what would happen is if you didn't have anything countering this effect,
My
you
mail
only
69,
had the
number
weather,
6969. Awesome.
somewhere between
Nice,
10
man.
and 20 or 30 million
All right,
years,
I have it saved now.
we're down to sea level. We've
Sick, man.
eroded
Thanks,
down
buddy. Appreciate it, man.
because, you know,
My mail, the
so
homie.
here's the thing.
Thanks, dude.
If everything is only moving at the rate of modern seafloor spreading, that means mountains are only uplifting at the rate of a centimeter or two a year. But if that's the case, then the uplift is really no faster than the wearing down of the weathering processes. You see, that's what I'm getting at. After all of this, that's what I'm trying to get at, is that the uplifting processes must be a lot quicker than the wearing down processes to end up with the mountain ranges that we see in the world today.
Right.
Or you'd end up with that peneplane.
Or you, who is an
See you, buddy.
artist
Yo,
who's
see you,
painted
my
a
man.
lot of like dinosaurs and Cretaceous pictures, and he's done a series of paintings showing the asteroid impact, and one of the
This might be a BS friggin'.
Yes.
I mean, if it correlates to the Great Pyramid,
It's
got,
got
the
hidden Earth numbers in it, yeah.
So,
Plato is showing here is that the inner island of 5 states would be half of a nautical mile, or a half minute of arc of the Earth's circumference.
and that's
Got
kind
it.
of let's see, the pyramid face, like on a side, is a half a second of arc.
What, a quarter of a second? Or maybe
I think one side is a half second of arc, right? If you take two sides of the Great Pyramid, you'll get one,
that's right, you're right.
basically 1 second of arc.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay, I've got down here in my notes, I've got the polar diameter of the Earth, 7,899.988 miles. So, you know, it's fair enough. I rounded it off to 7,900. Equatorial diameter, 7,926.677259 miles. The mean diameter, 7,917 miles.
Wow.
So there we go, right there. The mean diameter, right, times pi gives you the 24,872.72, which we could then assume would be a mean circumference. You divide that by 43,200, and now you have the inner island, which was the dwelling place of the gods, right?
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
And there's, yep. I mean, that's the same scale that the Great Pyramids modeling, 43,200.
200, yeah.
But like
Yes.
it's, I know it
So
sounds
what's
really coincidental, but the
significant
point
about
is
that
that
number? Well, we find
this
it
is
all over, but how
Freemasonry.
do we
This
find it?
is-
How would we find that number
they
in
build it
everyday
in
use?
stone. They build information into stone.
In
That's
everyday
why it
use?
persists
In everyday
instead of
use.
language, geometry. That's why these geometry in
I don't know
stone
that. Oh, no,
instead
I
of
mean, we use
books. 'Cause
precession every
books,
day,
they don't
but I don't
last,
know
or
how.
computer hard drives, they don't last.
I know
but
you
stone
guys. Don't you guys
pyramids,
adjust your schedules according
buildings.
to the session of the
Yeah,
equinoxes?
we're always
Yeah,
changing.
I knew that.
It's really
Yeah,
interesting
I
stuff,
figured
man.
you did. I mean, I was hoping you did because clearly I don't. If you didn't, I don't know if you'd be.
Yeah, we can't hang out anymore, right?
Yeah, no, that's it. Okay, think about the diurnal cycle. What is the diurnal cycle?
The day and night cycle.
Yeah, the day and night. Okay, so how many hours in the diurnal cycle?
24.
24, based upon transits of the solar disk across the local meridian. So, in other words, if we set up that plumb bob and we're looking due south, right, and we're sighting against the plumb line, which could now define our local meridian, right? So now, through the course of the cycle, we picture the image of the sun as being a disk with a dot, a hypothetical geometrical point in the middle. When that point transits the local meridian, you count 24 hours. We've taken that unit, that solar cycle, which is based on the Earth's rotation, and we've divided that into 24. So the whole 24-hour cycle is totally based upon this rotation.
This is Cosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Cosmographia podcast with Randall Carlson. What's up, Randall?
What's up? Well,
Yeah, here you go.
should we talk a little bit more about Atlantis, since that's
We
what we've been
should.
talking about the
Absolutely.
last 3 or 4 episodes, before we move on to other things, even though those other things are, of course, related. It's all interrelated. Let's always keep that in mind.
100%.
So, yeah. Brad was talking a bit about the hurricane. I haven't had even a chance to check today to see what the damage is, but I understand it's pretty severe.
Well, yeah, just the west end of the Bahamas. It just sat there for.
That's the other subs. Right, so you've got those two, and basically what we should do is just put all of them in a room together. The hypsothermal, because when you think hypsothermal, that doesn't necessarily invoke the same idea, the same picture of a benign climate as the climatic optimum.
Right. And that the climactic optimum takes place right after, or close to, within a couple of thousand years of
The column here, these are the relative oxygen isotope ratios, which we'll explain sometime. I'm not going to get into the background of that tonight, but at another recording, we can delve into some of the specifics of these dating processes and other proxies for, and that's what this is. This is a proxy for global temperature change, because what it does, it's the cooling and the warming changes the concentrations of the oxygen 18 ratios that are preserved in these ice cores. And the ratios between oxygen 18 and oxygen 16 in a variety of settings will fluctuate according to temperatures. So that's what we're seeing here. And if we start at the top, we're at the present. And if we go down this column over here on the left, the Holocene interglacial, I'm calling it 10,000 years, just simply in round numbers, although in virtually all the literature now, the Holocene is marked as beginning at 11,600 years ago. So going backwards down, we have the Little Ice Age, and you'll see that there's two phases. And there was a warming phase, sort of, that broke. And if you look at the graph here, you'll notice if the graph peaks to the right, it's getting warmer. If it peaks to the left, it's getting colder. So what I've done here is this vertical line represents the modern temperature for comparison. So you can see that the temperature is waving back and forth across the modern average, right? I think you would say that this line would probably represent the average between, say, 1950 from the climatic optimum to the ocean basins. And so there was over here where I'm tracing up, there was a huge meltwater spike right there at this warming. That was meltwater pulse 1A. It's generally dated around 14,500 to 14,600 years ago, which for now I'm prepared to accept, although I would look a little further that perhaps some of the events that were transpiring in this transition from full glacial, which is all the way over here to the left, up to interglacial, which is this Holocene graph right here, the inputs of energy that brought us from this stable, semi-stable state to this state up here may have contributed to contaminating the record. It may have contaminated the radiocarbon record. It may have contaminated the geomagnetic record. And the things that are now being used to determine these dates, they may have been biased for example, by a massive flux of radioactive carbon into the atmosphere. Perhaps some type of a response from the Earth's geomagnetic field that causes enough fluctuations that assumptions are made about the timing between those fluctuations, which may actually be taking place much faster than some of the chronologies that are based upon other assumptions. So my point is that I would take this dating here, once you get past this point, because of the enormity of these changes, I say that what I'm saying is that we should be a little bit suspect about the dates. I would not be surprised if there were further refinements of those dates that took place. And what I'm getting at in a big roundabout way is, for now, I'm going to go 14,600 for this warming spike right here, which coincides with meltwater pulse 1A, which was the first really massive pulse of glacial meltwater back into the global ocean basin.
Implies at least a somewhat advanced civilization. They're gearing spring technology. When you have these very accurate maps
of the graph here. Please, somebody explain this to me, right? At this point, there's nobody explaining that. So if there's nobody explaining this, which really was the norm for a couple of 100,000 years, then don't stand there and tell me with a straight face that the debate on climate change is over. But right in here, this is this peak, this after you have this major warming spike right here, which coincided with meltwater pulse 1B, then you'll notice you have this succession of lurches back into full glacial cold. And the depth of the full glacial cold right here coincides with that younger driest boundary at about 12,900 years, roughly. That's that spike right there, that spike of colder. And you can see basically what happened is that the climate lurched back into the full depths of glacial cold after warming. Now, notice that the trail here is you're coming from the full depths of the late glacial maximum, which is about right here at about 20,000 years ago. If you were to take this whole big massive convulsion out of it, you can see that this would sort of almost continue and tie in right here. You see that?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Now, we talked about Milankovitch forces, which is the shifting relationship between the Earth and the Sun due to the distance between the Earth and the Sun at its particular season, the tilt of the Earth's axis, and so on. these Milankovitch forces are inducing climate change on a very long, protracted scale. So you've got slow changes that are accumulating over centuries. And if we go back to the end of the last ice age, we begin to see that after the full depths of the glacial cold, it began to warm. The climate began to warm gradually, and this was consistent with a greater influx of thermal energy to the Earth due to changes in the Milankovitch relations between the Earth and the Sun. So it started warming, and as a result of that initial warming, gradualistic warming, the great ice sheets began to contract. And once they began to contract, there was enormous amounts of augmented floodwaters coming off of the ice sheets, right? So there was an enhanced flux of glacial meltwater from the continents back into the oceans with this Milankovitch warming. But then what happens is that Milankovitch warming right here, like I said, using the present date at about 14,600 years, that Milankovitch warming is suddenly interrupted by this massive spike of 10 or 12 degrees centigrade warming. I mean, literally in a matter of a few years. Within less than 5 years, maybe as quick as a single year, right? So you've got now 10 to 12 degrees centigrade, it's going to be 18 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So that is an enormous spike of warming. I mean, it's 10 times beyond the warming we have seen in the last 150 years. So anyways, you've got this first enormous spike right here. Then you've got all of this lurching back and forth down to the depths of the Younger Dryas right here. And then you've got the second warming spike coming out right here. And then whatever happens, the planet continues on out of the ice age and comes up into the climatic optimum right there.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that almost immediately after this violent cataclysmic birth of the Holocene, nature almost went through this 3,000 year period of being very benign and almost nurturing, because think about survivors of this catastrophe. Now bear in mind that it was between these two spikes that most of the great megafauna of the Pleistocene, of the late Pleistocene, disappeared. And it was also at the end of this right here, right in this area, where the Clovis culture disappeared, right? So are these unrelated? Is the disappearance of the Clovis culture and possibly the Natufians in Europe declining in numbers at the same time? The disappearance of the megafauna, half of the species, great megafaunal species of the planet, roughly disappearing within this window right here. I would say, yeah, there's definitely a correlation between that. I mean, how could there not be? Because look, we're talking now about species going extinct with another degree or two of warming in the next 100 years. And if you read some of the popular literature now that's designed primarily to get people worked up into a frenzy of fear about a minuscule change in climate, the fear is that, we're going to lose a tremendous number of species in the next century if the planet warms another degree or two. Well, here the planet warmed 10 degrees in 1 to 5 years, and guess what? You did have extinctions in there. And interestingly, a lot of these species that were able to survive through all of this,
yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Didn't make it through this. So there was something qualitatively different about this Balling-Alarod, Younger Dryas pre-boreal transition, which is basically what you're looking at here. Balling-Alarod is this warming that you see right here. Then you have the spike, and then you have the Younger Dryas, and then you have the pre-boreal coming out of the Younger Dryas. And so by the time we're coming out of the Younger Dryas, half the megafaunal species of planet Earth are gone.
Right, and you've said before that humans are a form of megafauna, so
yeah,
like that correlation of like Clovis people and other peoples disappearing, along with all these other megafauna mammals, makes sense because humans are a form of megafauna. So yeah, if megafauna were dying, then so would humans be dying.
Well, yeah, it would make sense.
Yeah.
And so in the aftermath of these cataclysmic transitions here, basically what you had is, as you come into the climatic optimum, you had a rapid recovery of natural ecosystems, wide scale, right? And you had low population, and you had essentially no competition for space or resources. And so most likely when you begin to look at the broad scale of a global catastrophe, undoubtedly what you had was large areas of the planet that were essentially depopulated, other places that would have been in ecological terms a refugium, a place of refuge where life was able to survive, where species were able to survive, where perhaps pockets of survivors who then were able to essentially begin to recover once the dust had settled. But what you would have would be in an environment like that, you would have isolated groups of survivors that are basically.
Imagine how long they could go. You know, how many of those groups would have assumed for one reason or another that they were the last people left on Earth. And you go, and then go thousands of years before it, and then suddenly they meet people and they're like, whoa, you know.
Exactly.
All of your oral traditions are telling you you're the only ones left. You know, I mean, that must have been nuts.
When you begin to appreciate the magnitude of the global changes that transpired during this, yeah, it makes perfect sense because geologically, yeah, we're going to go out and we'll begin to teach people how you can recognize these boundaries and how it becomes clear that, yes, huge swaths of the Earth's surface were completely erased. You know, when you're talking about erosional events always coincide with depositional events. And so one of the things that when you begin to look at the what I would call, let's say, cataclysmic geomorphology, you begin to see that there are places where large tracts of the Earth's surface have been stripped away, and other places where vast tracts of the Earth's surface have been buried, you see, because if you strip away from place A, it's going to bury place B, wherever it ends up, if it's not fully carried out to the ocean. But there are many places where, you know, you've got hundreds of feet of sediment that are essentially entombing the pre-existing landscape. And you've got other places where that pre-existing landscape is gone, completely gone. And you might be standing on the modern landscape, but the pre-existing landscape might have been hundreds of feet over your head. But that material is gone, see? So whatever was going on there culturally, there's not going to be any trace of it left. Conversely, if it's in a depositional environment, it's possible if that deposit was low energy enough that there could be things preserved. And I think that we're going to be finding some of that stuff buried, in some cases hundreds of feet under the present surface of the Earth. In other cases, you know, 200, 300, 400 feet below sea level. But bear in mind, when you have these huge meltwater pulses, you're going to talk about a very agitated ocean for a period of time. And as the ocean is rapidly rising like that, you're going to have very high energy typhoons. You're going to have storm surges. You're going to have just the wave action alone of this rapidly rising sea level is going to tend to be highly erosive to anything that was there on the previous coastline. Because when you go back to this period, say 15,000 years ago, you're looking at a coastline that's, you know, 400 feet lower than sea level. So it's going to be massively shifted in a lot of places from where the present coastline is.
Yeah, in some cases that's hundreds of miles, right?
In some cases, yes. Yeah. So that rising sea level, that highly energetic rapidly rising sea level is going to tend to erase those coastlines. So, but even given that, I still will predict that we're going to begin finding more and more evidence once we get the technological capabilities to really explore archaeologically at those, you know, below sea level, that we're going to begin finding stuff that's showing, you know, what was going on there 5,000, 10,000, 15, 20,000 years ago.
Out at the edge of the continental shelf.
Right.
In a lot of cases, yes, it does coincide with the continental shelf.
One cool thing that people can do, I've done this with Google Earth, is you can look at some river systems that are coming off the landmass and going, just pouring into the ocean. If you're looking at Google Earth and looking at the sea bottom, you can see that the canyon that river is in continues way out under the ocean, which is only possible if that used to, when that was dry land. So you can see the erosional features of the river continue out sometimes, many, many dozens of miles beyond the present shoreline, showing you how the, that the ocean has risen up over that canyon since those meltwater places. So.
Yes.
Excuse me, Mike. Randall, I didn't want to interrupt, but before you get away from that graph, I think you need to take a minute to tell people the source of that. If that's the Greenland Ice Sheet Project, it was the early 90s, so that data's been around for 25 plus years. There was another Greenland Ice Sheet Project 2, I think, was early 2000s. So this is something that's online and people can find, and it's been available for people to study. But yeah, if you could talk, a minute about what actually where that graph comes from.
Yeah, well, it was a 5-year project of extracting cores from the summit of the Greenland ice sheet. There was a European team and an American team. It was a very heroic enterprise. Again, they were limited, throughout the year. There was only a small window when they could actually get up there and drill these cores. So you got a picture, a core here that I'll go back to that graph, pull it up again. But you got to figure that there's a core here that's going down. No, let's see. Okay, so if we go down the left-hand side, you'll see 1,500. That's 1,500 meters, right? So 1,500 meters that's just under 5,000 feet. So that's almost a mile down right there. So you got a picture. You get an ice core that's maybe 5 inches or so in diameter. And the damn thing, it comes out in pieces, but the full extent of it, it's a mile of ice.
A mile long.
Yeah, because previous ice cores were taken closer to the periphery of the ice sheet, where there's more ice movement. So the idea of going to the summit was to try to get the most stable mass of ice, extract those cores, and then begin to analyze what's going on with those cores isotopically, what's going on in terms of gaseous inclusions, as you might find in air bubbles, and things like that. So study of these ice cores is ongoing, and there's a whole archive. I'm not sure where these ice cores are archived at right now, but they're there. And if we get some serious scientists coming up that want to study this further, those ice cores are there, and they really deserve a lot more study than they're getting. Because obviously, if you're talking about, 200,000 years of time, well, nobody's looked at all 200,000 layers of ice comprising that the whole column. I mean, there's a lot of work there that could be done yet to disclose more information. Because when we go into this graph and we go to this stage right here, bear in mind that you're looking at 12,000 years to 250,000 years compressed into this first 1,500 meters here. Actually, look, this shows the whole thing, which goes down to 3,000 meters, right? So that's the full depth. So when you get down to 3,000 meters of ice core, so I was way too conservative before. So 3,000 meters is right at almost 10,000 feet. So when you go down through 10,000 feet of ice, you're now to the from the summit of Greenland. You're now at basically base level, and you start bringing up rocks and soil and things.
Yeah, Mike, did you have a question before we move on to the next? You were going to ask something.
No, I was just going to comment with your remark about the canyons. Those would be the most likely places to look for civilization, evidence of civilization.
Yeah.
In underwater archaeology, because that's where people live.
Next to the rivers.
Except Mike, except that those canyons are massive meltwater conduits. The force of the water flowing through those canyons would have been enormous. So part of my point is that, yes, and in fact, it's true whether you're looking at submarine canyons or if you're looking at river valleys above sea level. You know, almost all of the rivers you can look at one point carry these enormously augmented flows that would have essentially wiped away anything that had existed there. Villages or communities or even towns or cities, you know. Some of the early towns like Jericho and Katolhoyak. Let me see if I used to know how to say it.
Yeah, Chatlahoyak or something like that.
Chatlahoyak, yes.
Chatlahoyak, yeah.
Yes, are between 8,000 and 9,000 years old. Now, there's no reason we couldn't say such an urban area couldn't have existed 15,000 years ago. I mean, that's just an assumption. But the thing is that a city like either one of those existing in any river valley is not going to survive these transitions that we've just been looking at here. I'm going to pull up some interesting graph here to further try to.
Well, I was going to ask about that too. That, you know, if this period where the sea levels were 400 feet lower, you know, there's going to be isostatically, there's going to be a completely different situation in terms of elevation on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean, how do we know that those continental shelves weren't actually much higher than they are now? Because you would have had these huge ice caps sitting on the ground, pushing down in different areas than where the ocean water is now pushing down.
Well, one of the things now that's been well documented is the presence around the great ice sheets of what is called the glacial forebulge. Because as you push down here, it's like the rim rises up. So you've got around the periphery of the ice sheets, you have tremendous vertical movements. Under the ice sheet itself, it's pushing down, but around the rim, the response is to bulge up. So then, when the ice is removed,
Commander Keen
that,
instead.
in this basin, it begins to rise while the forebulge begins to drop back down. So yes, that's one of the important points here is that, you know, for nearly 100 years, going on maybe 80 or 90 years, the idea has been out there of lateral motions of the Earth's plates. Since about the 1960s, continental drift has been an accepted part of, you know, geological activity, right? Geophysical activity of the Earth. But I think what's been underappreciated is the possibility of the vertical motions. And that's what we were talking about in previous podcasts. And it's very possible that some of these vertical motions were considerable.
I might just play Commander Keen
Hundreds,
instead.
if not
Let's see.
even 1,000 or more feet. Of modern marine geology and oceanography. Maurice Ewing, E-W-I-N-G. The title of this article that appeared in National...
This is the part I wanted to show. This is what I was showing before.
Curiously, the Atlantis
Exactly.
seamount, the
This
Plato
is exactly what I
seamount,
wanted to
the
say.
Great Meteor seamount, and Cruiser seamount. We'll be getting back to those. We'll have further discussions on that. So, having now placed the context, I want to go back to 1948, and Maurice Ewing and his work and discoveries, which I think leads us into the modern period of discussion about Atlantis. You know that prior to what I would call the modern period, that sort of really, I think, inaugurated in the 60s and 70s, you had a huge spike of interest in Atlantis that came in the wake of the publishing of Ignatius Donnelly's works in the early 1880s. And then you had, it sort of went into abeyance for a while, but you had ongoing interest that then you had a very large revival coming about the 1960s and 1970s.
Yeah, I think we talked about Ignatius Donnelly and
We did. So we won't revisit that at the moment. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop my share. And so getting back to Maurice Ewing. So I'm gonna just quote a little bit here from the article. So and it's written by Maurice Ewing. He says, okay, in quotes, "We're over the ridge. All hands were tense as the word spread through the little research vessel Atlantis, for it meant we had reached our goal. A mile or so beneath our keel stretched the gloom-shrouded peaks, valleys, and ridges of the longest mountain system on Earth, the mysterious Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which we had come to explore." And of course, they want to make sure that everyone understands. They say, though our ship was named Atlantis, we had no illusions of solving that age-old mystery.
Wow.
So a rather wild idea had led us to devote 4 hours to this particular rock dredging. Now, what they were doing was they were actually pulling dredges along the ocean floor to scoop up rocks and materials off the flanks of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Okay? So our hypothesis was that the long level terraces with sediments ranging up to 3,000 feet in depth were submerged shorelines. Okay? So they had noticed along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge that there were level terraces. Okay, you got to picture that, right? So they've now they thought, could these possibly be shorelines? So this is what they're going to try to get to the bottom of by dredging off materials off of these terraces. If so, if they were in fact shorelines, the steep cliffs rising from them should have boulders at their bases, as do wave-cut cliffs on our shorelines today. And he says, it is, of course, extremely radical speculation to identify these level stretches more than 2 miles below the sea surface as former beaches. Such a theory would require the obvious but almost incredible conclusion that the land here has subsided 2 miles, or else the sea has risen by that amount. Much work will have to be done before this startling theory can be proved or disproved. In any case, we were encouraged to find that at the bases of the cliffs above such terraces, rocks and boulders could be readily obtained.
Wow.
He says, then about halfway between New York and Bermuda, we brought up one of our most remarkable cores. It included sand like that found on beaches. How did beach sand get here, 300 miles away from any shallow water? I decided that it must have come from a mountain now beneath the surface of the sea, and predicted that such a seamount would be found nearby. Months later, in April, a mountain, as forecast, was discovered by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. At least a mile high, the mountain lies at approximately 36 degrees 42 minutes north and 67 degrees 57 minutes west. If the peak is the source of the sand, it must once have stood at or above the level of the sea, since sand is formed by weathering and wave action. This indication that the sea bottom has subsided, or the sea itself has risen, coincides with some scientists' interpretation of the submarine canyons off many coasts. The same core told us a further story of changes in the ages past. The sand contains the remains of bottom-dwelling creatures living today in present oceans, but confined to much shallower and colder water. The upper part of the core consists of a brownish silty mud containing quantities of the tiny shells of the warm water-loving creatures which flourish today in the Gulf Stream. And similar warm water forms appear in the layers of the silty mud below the sand. With this evidence, reports David Erickson, who had charge of the analysis of bottom samples, we can be quite sure that the sand layer was deposited during the most recent ice age, when tremendous masses of ice largely covered Canada and the northern parts of the United States, Europe, and Asia. Right, so let's pause there for a moment. If this mountain was above sea level during the ice age, I mean, this we're talking about we're talking about 20,000 years ago or less, right? So,
and again, that research is being done in 1948.
Yeah, 1948, exactly. So
I've always had a question too about that. Like, shouldn't there be, if the sea levels rose that much? Most coral doesn't grow. I mean, it won't form if the water is much deeper than 100 feet or something like that, right?
Well, that is what led John Shaw, the late great John Shaw, to devise his model of the CREs, catastrophic rise events. And he got that model from studying coral systems, reef systems around the planet that had drowned because of such rapid sea level rise. So CREs, catastrophic rise events.
Right, and so that also means that all the coral formations we have, the Great Reef off of Australia, all that stuff is only 10,000 years old or so.
Presumably.
Yeah.
If somebody has more information on that, but yeah, that would certainly be something that would be worth looking into.
Yeah.
I mean, to folks listening to this stuff, I hope it is becoming more and more clear that there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done to resolve these issues, these mysteries. A lot of scientific work that has to be done. There's many unanswered questions. I mean, it's regrettable that there's a lot of people walking around out there right now under the illusion that it's all figured out, and that there are some authorities ensconced in some in their ivory towers or wherever it is that have it all figured out. And so if they make this persist and proliferate right there. See what we're getting at?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
it
looks like that exposed continental plate on the east coast of North America is what caused it to push south. It can't go past that spot right there, which now the water's up higher and it can go up farther north. Right?
Yeah, and in fact, the Gulf Stream now is called the Gulf Stream because it diverts into the Gulf of Mexico and then comes back out.
Okay.
And which it didn't do during the Ice Age.
Yeah, it can't get in there.
No, it can't get in there. That's exactly right. So you see, the pieces here are beginning to fall into place. That it would just be premature to rule out the possibility of there being a relatively sophisticated maritime culture that could have evolved on islands in the mid-Atlantic ridge during the late glacial maximum. There's nothing at this point, pseudoscientific about that at all. These particular seamounts, which are named the Atlantis,